That's right. For this week's main topic, well, it is a big anniversary for a Disney classic animated film. It happened earlier this week, the diamond anniversary of an amazing film. And, technically today is not its birthday, but it can be its unbirthday today, right, Michelle?
That's true. Very good point. Oh, I like how you did that.
So we're doing a little unbirthday celebration to one of our favorite films, Disney's Alice in Wonderland, Michelle.
Yeah, and I see we're both sporting our Walt Disney 5K run with had the Alice in Wonderland theme.
Yeah.
So.
So one thing we have that's Alice in Wonderland, I think. So we both are wearing the same thing.
Well, I have my Alice in Wonderland teacup here and drinking my Alice in Wonderland tea.
So she's in the theme.
I'm in the theme.
You're in the theme.
And this is like my third cup of tea. So I'm a little buzzed.
And just like everybody in that movie, I'm a little mad. So I'm in theme as well. So let's go ahead and get to it. Because Michelle's research, it's going to be amazing as we dive into this classic film, which I think is peak Disney animation, especially for the nine old men, right? I don't know what you think about it, but it's such an interesting and fascinating film, and I can't wait to find new things that I'm going to learn from Michelle. So Michelle, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to, reference where I got my material, and my sources were either D23, the Walt Disney Company website, the Walt Disney Family Museum articles. They have those features on the Blu-ray, which we have, and watch that. There's also a business podcast called Acquired, and they actually did an in-depth study of the Walt Disney Company, and they had access to a lot of material in the archives and interviewing people who are like very notable former cast members and everything. So solid information. And I only share that because every once in a while people do ask, where do I get my material? Because I try to avoid just whatever.
You just know it
there.
all. It's just all in that brain of yours.
I know. But anyways, let's get into it.
Let's go ahead.
All right. So Alice actually was the third leading lady for the Walt Disney Company. She followed Snow White and Cinderella. It is the 13th feature films. I don't know whether you consider that lucky or unlucky.
It kind of makes sense for a crazy movie like Alice in Wonderland.
Exactly. But I mean, one of the things that, whether you want to call it unfortunate or unlucky is, and if you're watching on YouTube here, there's a picture of the title card that shows up at the beginning of the film. And actually Lewis Carroll, who's wrote Alice in Wonderland, his name is misspelled on there. There should be 2 L's in Carol's, but anyways.
Right off the bat, just the opening credits, boom, a little bit of a faux pas there. Very interesting. And I don't know if they'll correct that in the new anniversary edition that they're bringing out, but they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Leave it in there.
I know. It is what it is, right? So, all right. To begin with, on our journey here, through Wonderland, the Wonderland of our brains, my brain, I guess, is first looking at when did the company decide to make this film? And in actuality, there is no set date, because there was actually multiple times that Walt was considering doing something with this story. Now, a lot of you may already know, and I know you, honey, remember that at the beginning of the official Walt Disney Company, they had the Alice comedies, which had the live action girl, who was Alice, blend in with animation, and it had this it wasn't really like the books, but it was definitely imaginative kind of thing. And so, there was that consideration with Walt, should we move forward with the Alice in Wonderland story? And should it be something that is a blend like that? But anyways, he was considering it even before Snow White actually was released. However, in 1933, Paramount Studios beat him with a live action film. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, we have some photos taken from that 1933 film that Paramount Studios did, which was all live action. Honey, what do you think? A little creepy, maybe?
That caterpillar. Not as cute as the caterpillars we have around in our home.
That's true.
But yeah, that white rabbit. I don't know about that white rabbit there.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. Although when I first saw the White Rabbit here, a little bit of it reminded me of Tim Burton-esque,
Yeah,
in the later films that came out.
sure.
But anyways, that happened.
So
So,
that happened.
what happens next is that Roy heads over to London to purchase the rights from the publisher, and it was posted in like the New York Times. There's again on YouTube here. There's a little clip. I think it was from the Hollywood Reporter, uh, announcing that the company did purchase the rights. The New York Times put Walt Disney has purchased the rights to Alice in Wonderland books from the Macmillan Company, Lewis Carroll's publisher, for a film cartoon, according to the Daily Telegraph. The purchase, it is said, to include the rights to reproduce Tenniel's famous illustrations on the screens. And Tenniel is the person that Lewis Carroll
Illustrated the books
had.
for Lewis Carroll.
Yeah. Initially, he had illustrated his own books.
Hmm.
But Tenniel was actually a very famous cartoonist, I guess, but for newspapers, because again, back then they didn't have photos in their
Sure.
newspapers as much and things like that. So it was pretty substantial person to bring into that project for Lewis Carroll. But anyways, but around that same time that they got the rights to it, then we're talking about the 40s. That's when like Dumbo and Bambi were being made. The Goodwill Tour was taking place. There was a war. There was a lot of things going on in the company that they weren't going to move forward at that point with Alice in Wonderland. However, again, another company, Decca Records, they produced an album with Ginger Rogers telling the story. And honey, who do you think they got to design the cover of that album?
Was it Tenniel?
No, the Disney company.
Oh, well, there you go.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, again,
Doesn't look like I'm looking at it here on the picture. For those of you on YouTube, they can look at it. I'm going to zoom in on it here. I wouldn't. There's no way I would say that's Disney.
right.
Yeah, I mean, not that it's not bad art. I just doesn't have that feel that I'm like, oh yeah, that's Disney.
Right.
For sure.
Well, I mean, again, maybe they wanted to distance themselves somewhat in the fact that it wasn't their production, and so they didn't want it to look too Disney-esque.
Because we're going to do our own Disney thing
Yeah.
later on. So,
And again, in the 40s, that's when Mary Blair, who did a lot of concept art for the film, was over in South America with the Goodwill Tour. So things weren't progressing until after that. This album came out in 44, I believe. So it really wasn't until after that, like really in the late 40s, that there was a decision to really move into making this project happen. So the next thing they have to deal with is how to tell the story. And, initially, again, Walt still liked the idea of live action and animation, but, after more discussions and everything, it was decided to just go full on animation. Excuse me. But that's not the only challenge that they had with telling this story, right? With other stories, Walt and the company used fairy tales. Now, fairy tales, we've heard fairy tales, like if you're talking Cinderella or whatever, or Snow White, different versions of it. We're all okay with it. I mean, like Cinderella, as long as there's like a glass slipper, and evil stepsisters that are, torturing her, we believe that story as Cinderella. But this, on the other hand, was an actual book. And people knew this book, it was something that was taught in school. Walt read it when he was in school. So it's a little more challenging when you're taking something that people already have like an understanding of. They may have seen the illustrations that Tenniel had put together, and I may be saying his name wrong, and I apologize. But anyways, that's what people were already accustomed to. So how do you Disneyize it, right?
Right. Yeah, very interesting thought process. And, and a lot of times Disney would take those classic fairy tales and maybe brighten them up a little bit. As a matter of fact, it was kind of known as Disneyfying some of these things. Because if you really look into some of these fairy tales, there isn't always the happily ever after necessarily that happens. There's some deep, dark things that can happen in them. And Disney not that he didn't have a touch of that in there, but he wanted to have a good happy ending most of the time, and so he would do that. And so, he could change it and brighten it and make it more acceptable for all members of the family as well. So yeah, going to a book that is so well known and trying to translate that onto film, not exactly easy for sure.
Right. The other challenge that came about as this book is it is kind of weird, right? The story is
It's
weird, the
kind of weird.
characters are weird, and what may become fun or maybe even considered charming in a book, trying to put that on a big screen could really be a challenge, right? The other thing that challenged them is there wasn't like a real villain. I mean, they had, the caterpillar, or I mean, the Cheshire Cat, but he wasn't really a villain, In Queen of Hearts,
You're just more mischievous.
right. In Queen of Hearts, she doesn't come in till the end, and is she really a villain that's changing thing, or is she just more of a bully
Right.
kind of character? So it didn't have that same kind of storytelling. And speaking of what, it didn't even have the flow of a story. It was like chapters and disjointed vignettes and things like that. So really,
It's very much a fever dream. Let's be
yeah.
honest. Alice in Wonderland is very much a fever dream as you go through it because it's all over the place.
It is. It is. So trying to make that into a cohesive film was difficult. Now, honey, when I'm trying to put together my research, I kind of felt that with this, that the material that I was finding out in researching this was very disjointed.
Had your own little fever dream
Yes,
going on as you
yes.
were trying to put this all together.
So hopefully I've, managed at least as well as the animators of trying to put together some story about this, down the rabbit hole kind of situation. So how did they actually land on an approach telling this story? One of the things I did is, first of all, is not use as many characters. The book had too many. And they kind
And
of,
there's still a lot of characters in it.
right. And they consolidated some, like the Queen of Hearts is multiple people in the book and everything. So they kind of tried to use that. Great visuals, right? I mean, beautiful, vivid colors and backgrounds. They're, when they did some of their other classics with fairy tales, those backgrounds kind of look real. And this was not. This was opposite of that.
That golden afternoon segment when she's in the flower garden and the flowers I mean, it's incredible animation. I mean, really is. I mean, obviously, Fantasia is probably peak Disney animation of that kind of period, but this is right there. I mean, especially that scene. I mean, so many of the scenes are like that, but that scene, what they do with the different flowers and making the faces and react and everything, and just there's a lot of tongue in cheek in it, and it's just
Right.
it's really fascinating to
It
watch.
is
Yeah.
100%, 100%. So, like I said, they use those great visuals. Mary Blair did a lot of the concept art, although the actual artists working on the film, they took inspiration, but not necessarily using a lot of her material. I think if you really are searching for her essence in that is in the scenes with the Queen of Hearts and looking at that background there and stuff. I think you can see more of Mary Blair's influence there than more so in the other parts of the film. But
Makes sense.
yeah.
I mean, but her bright colors, I think, come through in a lot of it. The way she used color,
Yes,
I think does come through a
exactly.
lot in this film. And I
That's
do
a good
think
point.
maybe not, they didn't specifically take the artwork into the actual animation that they're doing, but as far as the theming, I would say they definitely captured Mary Blair
Yeah, you're
throughout
right.
it.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yep. The other tool that they used was music.
Boy, so much music.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to say this has like the most music in it. I think I heard that it has more than any other film, or maybe up to that point.
And
I
we're
don't
not
know.
just talking score. It has a score, but
Right.
I'm talking actual songs. There's more songs than you think in Alice in Wonderland. When you go back and rewatch it at sometime soon, highly recommend you do. You'll realize just by us saying this,
Yeah.
you'll realize how many songs there are. There are a ton.
Yeah, like in each scene, there are songs that are helping tell that story as well, right? Actually, talking of music, this film received an Oscar nomination for Best Scoring of a Musical. It didn't win. It lost to An American in Paris.
Well, okay. All right.
Yeah. Anyways, now the other thing that, as a tool that they used in creating this film and telling the story, is that they did what's called live action reference footage, and that's where they take actors, have them reenact, and they film it scenes from the film, and they're actually using the recorded dialogue track. And in this film in particular, they had the actual Alice do the stand-in for a lot of these pictures, and it really helped the animators for studying movement, timing, how the physical things would move, and things like that. So that film in it itself wasn't preserved, but we do have some pictures available, and so we're going to show those here now on YouTube again, and you'll see the parallel between the film that was being recorded and what the animators put out. So there's a couple of those. We have Alice here and her sister in that scene. We have the walrus and again, I love how they have them all dressed up and
Right.
everything like that. And then we also have the Queen of Hearts, and having her, show what her
The croquet
movements.
would look
Yes.
like. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty interesting that they went to that much detail to.
They were doing a lot of that around that time. I know they did that with Bambi too. I mean, obviously it's not live actors with his Bambi, but I know that they brought deer in to
Right.
actually be able to animate these
That's true.
these different animals as well as possible, and they've been doing a lot of that, even up to like Hercules. When they did the muses for Hercules, they actually brought in people that were the muses. So they could see how they would move.
Yeah, and they had them dressed.
Right, exactly. So yes, it's a classic technique that they were using, but they brought it even forward into the 90s and so forth.
Right. One of the things that really influenced this were the animators being very particular about what the costumes were that they were using in these live action footage reference tools, because they wanted to see how that would flow and everything. So a lot of detail and consideration in creating, if you think about it.
For sure. Yeah, pretty incredible.
All right. So let's talk about the release of this film. And Walt actually decided to use television. And this was the first time to promote the film. In fact, it was his first television production. It was in 1950, and so think about it. It was before Mickey Mouse Club. It was before the Disneyland series. This was just his first one, and it was called 1 Hour in Wonderland, and it was actually displayed on Christmas Day of 1950. And so we have a little photo here taken from, I got this from the Walt Disney Family Museum, the website, but it has Walt there, and it has Edgar Bergen with his two puppets, Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd. Yeah. Kathy Beaumont, who played Alice, she voiced Alice, and as I mentioned, she was in that live action footage.
She's amazing as
She
Alice.
is.
Her voice is so spectacular throughout that film. She's
Yeah.
so good as
Yeah.
Alice.
Yeah. So she was in there. Plus Diane and Sharon Disney. And if you're watching on YouTube and you see the arrows, those are his daughters. They were in it, and actually they announced their name in it in a funny little skit with Edgar Bergen. So or actually, I think it was with one of his puppets. But anyways, so that's how they chose to release it. I thought it was interesting that it was actually released on Christmas Day, but it really did help with promoting the film. So.
Very cool.
All right, honey. So how do you think the release actually went in theaters?
I'm guessing it was a little bit shaky to begin with. I don't know what people thought about this, what this film was. It was not that long. I mean, it was after the war. It was 1951, but a little bit crazy, but I'm guessing the numbers weren't fantastic to begin with.
Right. And one of the things I had on that podcast acquired, what they were talking about too was, when you talk about in the 30s, the number of times people went to the theaters was incredible. It was like I can't remember the number, but let's say like 50 times a year. That was the average Americans were going to theaters. Um, because they didn't have television either. That's where, and they did newsreels and things like that. So,
Yeah, if you wanted to see anything like that, that's where you saw it. It
yes.
wasn't, yeah.
But by the 50s, and television is becoming pretty prominent now, that number dramatically decreased to like a handful of times that people were going to the theater. So, you're right. It wasn't very successful in the box office. In fact, it didn't really cover the production cost. So, um, but I did run across one thing that I thought was pretty interesting, and that is actually from the 1951 company's annual report. And this is what they wrote about it. They said, due to the generally poor attendance at motion pictures theaters during its release, so saying that's the state of the country.
Right.
Alice has not performed as well at the box office as Cinderella. Because of these circumstances, and because Alice in Wonderland is our highest cost feature, it is not expected to produce a profit from its first release. However, it is a classic property, which should be a valuable asset to the company indefinitely. So, at this time, they had already started doing the re-releases of what they called in the vault, so like Snow White. And in fact, Snow White was going to be re-released again in this time period as well. I mean, and so they realized early on that, okay, we're not going to cover the cost of the profits now. And this is what they're telling the shareholders. But hold on, don't worry. It will become a valuable asset after all. And I think that has been an understatement.
Yeah, it's actually become a very beloved film, in all of its weirdness.
Right.
It's become a beloved film, and yeah, attractions have sprung out of it that are some of the favorites. I mean, obviously the Mad Tea Party, the teacups, you love it or hate it, depending on what you feel about spinning in those things. It's always there, and it's a staple in the Disney parks. But then if you go to Disneyland as well, the actual Alice in Wonderland attraction is one of the best dark rides you're going to find. And if you go to Disneyland and you don't ride it, you're missing out. You need to do it because it's amazing, and it's not anything you can find anyplace else. Even if you go to Disneyland Paris, they have that crazy cool maze that's there that is really simple yet really, really fun, and a great tie-in to Alice in Wonderland, because there is a maze in Alice in Wonderland, and it's phenomenal. And it's just another great way to spend a little bit of time when you're out there. But it's and yeah, we've got, as you mentioned earlier, Tim Burton spin-off movies because of it, and we're wearing shirts. The characters are beloved. Alice, whenever she shows up, will get a line for pictures. The Mad Hatter always will draw a line for pictures. Sometimes you'll run into interesting characters like the White Rabbit when you're out. That's always going to be a big draw.
Exactly.
Even sometimes you might find the March Hare somewhere, which is really interesting as well, if you can get a picture of them. But obviously, the impact of this film throughout Disney fandom has been huge over the years.
Definitely. Yeah. And, and it has gone through re-releases in the theaters. I think it was in the 70s and 80s it was re-released. Then it became on more digital, on video and things like that. And so it has taken on its own life and resurgence after this, what wasn't very impressive box office release.
And just think about the pop culture references as well. I mean, everybody knows the eat me, drink me, whether you grow or you shrink or whatever. And there are so many things that come out of this, the Mad Tea Party, the Young Birthday. There's so many things that have come from those books and from this film that are part of our everyday. And you may not even think about where it comes from, but it comes from this film itself.
That's true. I mean, and like you said, in terms of attractions, it sparked that, but also like in games, we see the Disney Valley. What am I playing? The Disney Dreamlight Valley has Alice in Wonderland there, and the Cheshire Cat and everything. In Kingdom Hearts, we saw that in one of the earlier renditions of that game. So yeah, definitely, and beloved, and the music is still timeless
Hmm.
and wonderful. And who doesn't love a lot of those
Hmm.
songs?
And like I said, even though it was a failure, quote unquote, at the box office to begin with, the fact that people are still loving the characters and loving the references and loving this movie to this day says a lot about it. That, hey, maybe it wasn't judged as well as it should be. Again, it's weird. It is a weird movie. You
Yeah.
watch it, it is weird, but it's cool in its weirdness,
Right, absolutely. I mean, Walt himself had criticisms of it, at that point, Walt wasn't as involved with directing all the films and things like that. He had he felt it didn't have the heart like what you would see in Cinderella and
Hmm.
Dumbo. He just felt like there could have been, maybe he wanted to see the White Knight have multiple appearances and kind of have that relationship with Alice be something that helps carry the film. But he said that wasn't the direction that it went. So,
Well, like you said, I mean, there's obviously a protagonist in Alice herself, but there's
mhm,
no real antagonist. There's
right,
antagonistic moments that she's
right,
going through in all these different vignettes that somehow are weaved
right.
together in this film, but there's no real antagonist there, so to speak, except for, like you mentioned, at the end when the Queen of Hearts is, trying to off with everybody's head.
Right.
But throughout it, it's just her. The issue is her trying to find her way and find her way eventually back home.
Right.
That is what the issue lies within it. That is where the conflict lies within it. But meanwhile, there's all these different adventures and interesting things that happen to her: growing, shrinking, singing flowers, growing this in a giant house into a house and too big to get out of a
Right.
house, and all sorts of interesting, weird things. And swimming in an ocean of her own tears.
Yeah.
Just weird things that go on in it. But it's fascinating to watch. And again, animation, just watching it from a musical and an animation standpoint, just taking that all in is pretty incredible. And again, Catherine Beaumont as well.
Yeah.
So good as Alice. She's
Yes,
so
she is.
good. And you get all the emotions from her, from joy to fear to sadness
Hmm.
to exhilaration to exhaustion. It's all there. She lays
Right.
it out pretty well, and it's amazing from an animated character,
It,
and it comes across in her voice acting.
exactly. Yeah, 100%. And she was obviously not the first person that Walt was considering, but he definitely did come up with the right
Mhm.
choice and as it turned out. Yeah, and there's obviously a lot we could have gone on about with the actual story and how much of it actually is in this story, in this film, things like that. But I thought kind of more looking at how did the company address it and deal with it, I thought would be a more interesting way to go. But now it lives on, right?
Right.
And in actual, as its 75th anniversary has come, the company actually decided to do a meticulous restoration. It They took the original 1951, and I want to say this right, nitrate Technicolor successive exposure negatives.
Say that 5 times
I
fast.
know, and scanning 324,000 frames. Now, I personally went down this rabbit hole of trying to research
I'm in a
technology
rabbit hole to go
successive
down the rabbit hole.
exposures. Yes, because I thought maybe there might be something very fascinating about that. It was intriguing, but actually, the Disney company has a website called the Disney Digital Studios website. And about 10 years ago, they did an article about the process of restoration and preserving films. The only problem is it's really written for folks not like me who already understands the science and what that technology
I thought you
is.
understood everything. What are you talking about?
So all I have to say is if you are interested in, early animation film, how it was produced and how they restore it and everything, check out the DisneyDigitalStudio.com. You
Hmm.
can find out some fun things there.
Yeah, if you're an aspiring uh, film person, maybe you can learn some things, and yeah, it'd be a fascinating way to kind of pick up some things or maybe increase your knowledge.
True,
Right.
true. But what was impressive is that it did, in order to accomplish this restoration, it's a very massive project. So, in addition to all that scanning, those 324,000 um, screens that they had to scan, it took an additional 6 months, roughly 10,000 hours, for a crew of 100 artists to go through and dirt cleaning and damage repair of the film. Pretty impressive. Huh?
Yeah, that's some work right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to be so delicate with that stuff too.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you've the company's already produced and released this revision, its aspect ratio, so that means how wide it is on the screen, has been restored to what the theaters were doing at that time, which was not really widescreen. It's a little bit wider than square. The earlier versions that were released were more square because they were designed to be on television back in the 80s.
Before we went to
when it was
widescreen,
released.
before we
Right.
went to HD. Yeah.
Right. So if you have one of those, like us, if you have one of those DVDs, even on Blu-ray, it's still the square. But if you purchase this newer one, it will have the theater size. But again, it's only 4% wider. So it's not a huge distance, but it has been gone through the restoration process for, making sure it's cleaned up and colors as vivid as they were originally.
As much as it can be weird watching a movie or an old television show that is still in that square, or as this is just wider than a square version, I'm glad they're not, because when you see sometimes some of these shows and they do kind of stretch them out to make them widescreen to fit into that. Oftentimes there's things that were originally there, and sometimes it's good jokes, or sometimes it's just amazing artwork or whatever that's in the background. It kind of gets, because of the fact that they have to fit this within and get the main protagonist or whomever is the subject of the scene into the frame itself. Sometimes there are some other things that are pretty cool and pretty interesting, and the people have done amazing work on that kind of got pushed out to the side. So I'm glad when they redid this, yes, they remastered it and touched it up and did it great, but they also made sure that all this fantastic animation work, including the backgrounds that so many of these animators and artists did, that they're still there for you to enjoy.
Exactly. So you see it as they wanted it to be seen on the big screen. So anyways, that is our look of Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole.
I love it. I love it. I learn new things. I learn new things every time Michelle does one of these. Great job again, Michelle. I get it. It's tough. There's stuff all over the place from this, but you did a great job of pulling that together.
Well, thank you.
And dropping some information for everybody to learn for the 75th unbirthday of Alice in Wonderland.